According to statistics, Burundi and South Sudan are two of the poorest countries in the world, with a majority of their citizens living below the poverty line of less than $1 a day. We have a dedicated video on why and how Burundi became insanely poor, which you can check out by clicking the card on your screen. South Sudan is the newest country in the world. The country gained its independence in 2011, and since its independence, the country has consistently been at the top among the poorest countries in the world. With a population of slightly over 11 million people and a nominal GDP of $3.1 billion, the situation in South Sudan seems to be getting worse. South Sudan's GDP per capita is $290 in 2023, while Sudan's GDP per capita is nearly $1,000, even though Sudan has 4 times the population of South Sudan. South Sudan is facing a severe humanitarian crisis. Its people are agonizing in poverty. The country that fought and forged its independence from Sudan should be full of hope. But instead, it's plagued by political conflict, economic struggles, and drought. These factors have led to large-scale displacement, widespread violence, and severe food shortages. A majority of the population, around 7 million people, require assistance, with more than 6.9 million people suffering from hunger. In this video, we'll take a deep dive into the country's dire economic situation and reveal how South Sudan became so insanely poor. But first, if you are new on the channel, welcome. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our videos. So, how did South Sudan become so poor? Several factors contributed to bringing South Sudan to the state where it is today. So let's get into it. Ongoing civil war. South Sudan's civil war has severely impacted all aspects of life. Infrastructural damage from the battle, which started in 2013, has been massively destructive, causing buildings, bridges, and highways to be damaged. The disaster has made it challenging for firms to run, which has disrupted the economy. Many individuals have lost employment, and businesses have been forced to close, making it challenging for thousands to make a livelihood. Due to the severe poverty and misery caused by the civil war, many people now need humanitarian help to live. More than 2 million people have been compelled to leave their homes as a result of the war. This has greatly strained the nation's resources and made it challenging for the government to deliver essential services to the populace. In refugee camps, where they are exposed to disease and starvation, many people have been forced to live in cramped, unhygienic circumstances. The humanitarian catastrophe caused by the conflict has left many people in need of food, housing, and medical care. In addition, thousands of young people have been forced to drop out of school and work to support their families as a result of the war. As a result, a generation of children has been lost because they were denied an education and forced to grow up amid a conflict. Children are also in danger of being recruited into armed groups and forced to engage in conflict. Along with the hardship it has inflicted on people, the war has had a detrimental effect on the economy of the nation. Businesses have found it impossible to function as a result of the infrastructural devastation, and many have been forced to close. Because of this, economic activities has decreased, and it is now more challenging for the government to raise money to pay for public services. The conflict has also resulted in a decrease in investment, which has further impeded the nation's economic growth. Corruption. Corruption is a huge problem in South Sudan. The country's elites control every aspect of the economy in a very bad way. This system has evolved rapidly since South Sudan achieved autonomy in 2005, still part of Sudan, and full independence in 2011. As per Transparency International's 2021 Corruption Perception Index, which appraises 180 nations based on their level of public sector corruption, South Sudan was placed last. It is a systemic problem that is deeply ingrained in the country's political and economic culture. It is known that government officials, from the highest levels to the lowest, engage in corrupt practices, such as embezzlement, bribery, and abuse of power. This undermines the economic development of the country and contributes to poverty. The scale of corruption in South Sudan is staggering, and it has a detrimental impact on the lives of ordinary citizens. Basic public services, such as healthcare and education, are often underfunded or non-existent, while infrastructure is in a state of disrepair. Government institutions' lack of accountability and transparency makes it difficult to address corruption, and many citizens are left feeling hopeless and frustrated. For example, on September 5, 2011, President Kiir directed that ABMC Company, a private construction firm owned by a close associate of his, Benjamin Bolmel, should receive 488 million South Sudanese pound, $244 million, without the authorization of the Council of Ministers. This payment was said to be for road construction. However, as of 2013, Neil Nguyen declared that there was minimal evidence that the company had done any of the contracted construction work. The problem of corruption in this country is deeply concerning, and its effects are compounded by the ongoing civil war. The war has caused a power vacuum, allowing warlords, militia groups, and other powerful actors to engage in corrupt practices without consequence. This has made it particularly difficult for international organizations and NGOs to operate in the country, as they find it impossible to work in such a chaotic and unstable environment. This in turn makes it even more difficult to combat corruption and bring about meaningful change. South Sudan needs both a resolution to the civil war and drastic measures to combat corruption to see any real progress in the future. Poor infrastructures caused by poor governance. Due to the country's landlocked location and lack of access to the outside world, South Sudan faces major difficulties receiving humanitarian aid and attracting foreign investors. One of the major reasons for this is the poor state of the country's infrastructures, specifically its deprived road network. These roads are in such poor condition that during the rainy season, it becomes almost impossible for aid workers, professionals, and other outsiders to access the country. As a result, the already dire situation for the locals is made worse. World Food Program estimates that the window for delivering essential supplies, such as 100,000 tons of food, or roughly 6,500 truckloads, is extremely limited. With only 3 months remaining before the rains, many areas will soon be rendered inaccessible yet again. Hence, there is an urgent need for immediate action to address the issue of poor infrastructure. This problem can also be traced back to the period before South Sudan's independence, when the previous government largely failed to invest in and maintain the country's road network, especially in rural areas. As a result, the development of the country has been heavily hampered. Furthermore, corruption was rampant during this time, with politicians using resources solely for their personal gain rather than for the betterment of the country and its people. Climate change and food insecurity. Climate change and conflict are becoming more closely linked, with South Sudan being a notable illustration of this connection. Weather records from the past 50 years have revealed a general rise in temperatures of around 33 to 35 degrees Fahrenheit. This has caused an uptick in the number and intensity of droughts, resulting in food and water shortages, as well as forcing people from their homes. South Sudan is considered one of the 5 most vulnerable countries in the world to the effects of climate change, according to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, UNOCHA. This is because of some reasons that make it difficult for the country to adapt to and deal with the effects of climate change, including the economy of the country, which is already fragile, widespread poverty, and persistent violence. To lessen the suffering of the populace, urgent and comprehensive action is required to address both the conflict and the effects of climate change in the nation. Floods and droughts in the region have historically led to conflicts in South Sudan, further strengthening the link between climate change and conflict. These floods and droughts, which have become more frequent and severe in recent years due to the increase in temperature, have led to a reduction in resources such as land and water. This has led to increased competition for these resources, which are essential for the survival of the population, particularly the 87% of the population who depend on agriculture, livestock, and forestry for their livelihoods. The depletion of resources due to floods and droughts has intensified competition for these vital resources, which are necessary for the population's survival. The link between climate change and conflict in South Sudan is evident in the historical pattern of hostilities developing after periods of extreme weather conditions. As global temperatures continue to rise, the frequency and severity of floods and droughts are also increasing, putting even more strain on the already scarce resources in the region. This competition for land and water is a major contributing factor to the conflict in South Sudan, as it becomes increasingly difficult for people to meet their basic needs. South Sudan faced a severe flood crisis in May 2021 that affected 8 out of the country's 10 states. As of November 2022, over 800,000 people were still grappling with its aftermath. Despite the gravity of the situation, it received little media coverage, making it difficult for relief organizations to secure funding to assist affected communities that have lost everything, from homes to infrastructure, due to the flood damage. The pattern of conflicts developing in the wake of floods and droughts in the area throughout history serves as more evidence of the connection between climate change and conflict in South Sudan. Due to these floods and droughts, which had decreased in frequency and severity in recent years due to the rise in temperature, resources, including land and water, have been depleted. Dependency on oil revenue, oil or nothing. The South Sudanese believed that their oil resources would be devoted to the country's development, but this turned out to be the opposite of their expectations because of the excessive dependence on oil. Oil has not promoted the country's development as it should have. Instead, it has hindered development due to leadership struggles over oil revenue. In 2013, a fight over oil revenue led to a civil war. Under President Salva Kiir, oil revenue was used to fund patronage politics and personal enrichment, which caused conflict among the elite. The country has been unable to diversify its economy or develop other industries, leaving it reliant on oil revenue. This hinders the government's ability to operate and develop the economy. However, the ongoing conflict has caused significant damage to oil production facilities, and the lack of investment in the oil industry has limited the country's ability to increase production and revenue. More so, the country lacks the necessary infrastructure to transport the oil from the production site to the ports, which has limited its ability to export oil. As a result, the country's economy is highly dependent on oil revenue, and fluctuations in the global oil market can have a significant impact on the country's economic stability. The country's potential to grow output and income has been constrained by the protracted fighting and the enormous damage that has been done to the oil production infrastructure. Furthermore, the nation lacks the infrastructure required to get the oil from the oil production site to the ports, which has restricted the country's capacity to export oil. As a result, the economy of the nation is heavily dependent on income from the oil industry, and changes in the world market for oil have proven to have a big influence on the stability of the nation's economy. Many people believed that the birth of the Republic of Southern Sudan a few years ago would improve the lives of its people. Instead, it would mark the beginning of a heightened conflict immediately after the country's formation. Civil wars broke out due to greed, which fueled corruption, ultimately weakening the government. The lives of Southern Sudanese have been deteriorating, with most citizens living below the poverty line. However, there's still a chance to revive South Sudan and bring it back on its feet, and it starts with better leadership. If you enjoyed this video, tell us in the comments section whether this South Sudan situation can be salvaged and how the Republic can bail itself out of extreme poverty. Don't forget to hit the like button and share this video.